Thank you, V, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many people coming on. It's Mark here from Helpforce. Since we launched the VIP results a couple of weeks ago, we've had an overwhelming response from a number of trusts who are keen to explore how we can work with them and support them to adopt and adapt some of the roles that were in the VIP program to help them with the current winter pressures and response to the second wave of COVID, and how we can help them build up their volunteers and engage volunteers in supporting their hospitals in what are obviously very challenging times. What we're suggesting is keen to hear from trusts who'd like to be supported in smaller groups. So where Helpforce sort of facilitates groups of 3 or 4 trusts together to focus on adopting and adapting particular roles. So if you would like to join that group and be part of that, then if you just go into the chat on this call and say that you're interested, we'll get in touch with you. So I'll put a reminder of that at the end of it. But as you're listening to Nancy and you're thinking, actually, I'd like to do this, but I'd like some more support and maybe work alongside some others, please just express your interest in the chat box and we'll get back to you. But without further ado, I'm really delighted that Nancy has given up some more time for us. She spoke really well and really impressed people at the VIP launch. As you know, she's head of volunteering at Barts, and she's going to talk to you about how she's specifically adopted the volunteer response model for COVID, which I know many of you will be interested in. She's going to speak for about 20 minutes. She's got some lovely slides lined up for us, and then we'll have an answer session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nancy. Over to you, Nancy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Such a nice introduction. Just to check that people can hear me properly. Yeah, shall I?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So if you could go to the next slide, please, that'd be really helpful. So just to set the foundation, set the seed about what is Barts Health Volunteering. So we're absolutely a community of people giving up our time to improve the safe and compassionate agenda across our trust. We're very clear about what outlines and defines a volunteer, and I'm sure many of you will have this right at the top of your strategy, but I think it's a very good starting point and always very important to make people aware. Next slide, please. And I think it's also really important and features very heavily in our strategy. Why do we have volunteers in the first place, and what are our considerations? So the strategy outlines exactly the outcomes that we wish to have. So when we're defining our roles, we're always defining the roles in terms of the outcome for the patient, what's the outcome for the organisation, and what's the outcome for the volunteers. And you only start to get roles really right when all of those 3 outcomes are achieved. The next strategy will start to feature a 4th outcome, which is the outcome for the community, because we're thinking about how we can support discharge. Next slide, please. So when considering how volunteers can make a difference on the ward, just keep pushing the button because this is an animated slide. We've got lots and lots of roles, and I'm sure the roles that you'll see here resonate with lots of you. You know, we have the meet and greet, we have the pets as therapy, we have the chaplaincy roles, we have some support in A&E, we have lots of varying different roles, support for the maternity wards, the support for dementia patients, talking about how we befriend lonely patients, things like assisting with our friends and family tests. We have shops and trolleys. We have our museums here at Barts, 2 museums, our charities, etc., etc. Okay, so that I suspect that a lot of what you see in front of you right now resonates with many of you, and I'm sure you all have very similar roles. However, if you move on to the next slide, please. The issue that we had, and I'm sure again this might resonate with many of you as well, is that volunteers, even though we had these roles all aligned, often volunteers would come back and said, well, I wasn't very well utilised. Or sometimes patients had visitors or weren't sleeping or didn't want to talk to us, or clinicians weren't, really proactive with the volunteers or didn't have time. And often clinicians weren't very clear about how volunteers could help. And, for me, were we making an impact on the trust key agendas? I don't think we were really. And we certainly weren't reaching our outcomes as I outlined before. So the sorts of things we were asking ourselves, well, how could volunteers make the most impact? And how do we change that dialogue? How do we actually get clinicians to really want to engage with the volunteers? How could we also make the volunteering an improved experience? The things we started to think about, how could we offer better training? How could we communicate better? How could we measure and evaluate the impact that volunteers were actually having? And right at the front of and at the top of our strategy is always that we want to have the right volunteer in the right place at the right time. Moving on, please. And this obviously created our theory of change. The theory of change is basically we need to really examine how we improve the productivity of our volunteers and how we make the most of their resource. We needed to engage with our senior managers, with stakeholders, and we really needed to get some more business intelligence about how volunteers can really support. We also needed to start thinking about how do we design a really flexible role for volunteers, so that we're hitting that right time at the right place at the right time agenda. And how do we then create a pathway for staff to contact us to request volunteers? So things that we started to do was to create a really flexible training package, a really flexible role. And you can see for yourself the sort of outcomes and ultimate goals that we wish to have through our theory of change. Move on, please. So the start for us was to do this via a PDSA. So the plan was to actually change all of our sort of volunteering more or less into a response model. Because yes, we were putting volunteers onto the wards to help with meal times, but the volunteers were going up there and sometimes the wards didn't need them. We wanted them to go to the wards and to support the wards where they were most needed. So things like meal times, things like end-of-life care. Through our business intelligence, we knew that some patients unfortunately died on their own. That wasn't acceptable, and we needed to align the volunteers with that. We needed to align volunteers with the safer staffing issues. We needed to align the volunteers with the discharge planning. And how could we do that? And the only way that we could do that was by providing this multifaceted role where people actually asked us, what can I have a volunteer to help with this? And these were the sort of first, second, and third drivers. These were the actions that we initially took to lay the ground. Move on, please. So out of our sort of conversations, out of our own intelligence, out of the feedback that we'd had from volunteers, we started to create the role. We knew that they could pick up TTOs. That's probably quite a familiar role as well with many of you. We know that that is a key discharge delay, not the whole reason for a discharge delay, but an important one. We knew that we needed to support meal times. We knew that taking patients out for walks, now this is really important because we were told, for example, that patients who felt, particularly on our trauma wards, who weren't able to get out, for example, to smoke, would get aggressive with our staff. So again, that aligns to another outcome in terms of supporting or reducing the level of violence towards staff. We know that patients who are very lonely and needed a bit of extra help can help to reduce the anxiety, that can release staff time. We know that providing emotional support to anxious patients can also release staff time. So as you can see, we were really looking at the impact. Where were the key business priorities for the Trust, and how could we align our volunteer resource? Emergency departments, always a huge pinch point, particularly during the winter and particularly at the moment. So out of that, we started to create our role, this multifaceted role. Move on, please. Some of the tools that we initially had to think about, we had to think about the training. So the training, which was key to this, we started by saying that the initial role that all responders could do and was mandatory would be befriending in meal times and TTOs. They could then move on to a sort of pick and mix module of training to accommodate some of the other elements of the role. So they could go then on to train for ED if they wished, if they wanted to help the emergency department. They could also then go on to train to learn about end-of-life care and how they could support end-of-life care. They could then go on to train to learn about moving and handling and assisting. We were lucky because they gave us a volunteer hub. That was really important because that gave us visibility. People would touch into us and talk to us about how they thought volunteers might help. We also created a fact sheet about what volunteers can do, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And that was handed out across the wards that we were working with, to huddles, to site areas. And we started to attend huddles, team meetings, senior nurse meetings, etc., and had conversations about these active responders. Move on, please. This is just a little bit about the pathway of the volunteer. It's a bit too much to go into it in this detail, but very happy to share if people would be interested. But basically, we would take a call, and then we'd align a volunteer who'd had the right training, and they would then go to the area that they were required. Move on. Obviously, there were challenges, there were risks, and we learned a lot on the way. The first thing I think is managing expectations. So, you know, after all this time, 5 years I've worked at Barts Health, and I have found it hard to get people to work with volunteers. One, because there's such a disconnect between how clinicians understand the role of volunteers. But when we were with the fact sheet, we were able to sort of demonstrate, well, you could ask a volunteer to help with this. We then got a flurry. People started to get really interested, and we needed to train the volunteers up to manage the expectations of the clinicians. So we were selling our ware, if you like, and then we weren't always able to have enough volunteers to cope with everything that we've been asked to do. So just, you know, it's best to start small and to grow it. Really identify those areas where volunteers can most assist, as I've described. A lot of people talk about bleeps, but I don't think the bleeps weren't as effective as the hubs or actually going towards and actually visiting huddles. You have to keep seeking it out. You know, you have to keep having these conversations with clinicians and keep reminding people of the service. Also very important to, for example, align your governance with the role, which I'm sure, you know, teaching grandmothers to suck eggs here, but, you know, the TTO, for example, have a conversation with pharmacy about how that might work. Be clear about the role complementing and adding value, so it remains always non-clinical. We had a few issues with the TTO collections and porters, so it's always very good to be clear about how it's complementing. Book the training sessions well in advance, use your reliable software, better impact, and trial it with a few wards. Yeah, move on. So how we converted this during COVID-19. So we were really in a good position because we had this all set up. We had the volunteer hubs, which was great. We knew how to work, having a multi-role. We knew that people knew about us and that they would come to us about what they thought volunteers might be able to do. We're very clear about the parameters. For example, we initially stood all volunteers stand from wards, and we looked for the things they could do around the peripheries. We had the bleeps and phones available to us. We created the fact sheet that you can see on the right to support the COVID-19. And we're sort of really well recognised now, I guess, as a resource for business continuity, which is great. And we really didn't know what volunteers would be needed for, so we sort of made assumptions, and we created that first fact sheet, but that changed as the situation changed. If you want to move on, please, Vi. So what did they do in the end? I mean, they've taken up visitor packages to patients, they've sent messages to a loved one, they've done the food and donation to staff, they look after the staff wellbeing rooms, they've supported the fit testing and the immunity testing, they've done front of house screening, locating and documenting deceased property and contacting next of kin, so moving equipment for new wards, PPE stock management, escorting visitors to wards for end of life care, distributing iPads for video calls, patient packs, patient activity packs. They've prepared scrubs. They've prepared something like 5,000 scrubs for the night ward. So they're hugely active, and they were really well thought of. And like I said, there's not a day that goes by when staff say to me the volunteers are fantastic, which, 5 years it's taken me to get there. And it is largely because we are responding effectively to what we're being asked to do. And we're able to do this because we've got the governance, and we're very clear about our training package. The last bit is just some of the photos, and so we can swiftly move through those. Things like 60,000 meals were delivered, 300 pieces of property back to the next of kin from those that sadly died. It was fantastic. It was really, I worked on the Olympics before this job, and it really reminded me of that. It was just like an absolute community committed effort that, everybody put to get through this. And it was fantastic. And I think it's really important to mention that volunteers, people, our communities want to be involved and help us resolve this. And I think we have a duty to find platforms for them to get engaged and to help. These are some of the British Airways wingmen who were stood down, and they came and offered a bespoke service in our wellbeing rooms for staff. So yes, it was very vibrant. But I think in conclusion, we've sort of changed our model completely of volunteering. We do have standard roles. Of course, we have our chaplains, we have our pets of therapy, we have our dementia buddies. But the response model has the ability to really work around what the clinicians want. And it has the ability to be really flexible, so it can change quite quickly. And I think it really is really sort of given us the way to have the most impact for our patients, the organisation, and our volunteers, as mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation. It's a lot to cover, and I hope some of it's helped, but I'm open for questions, and I'm really happy to help with anything you might need. Okay, thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. That's absolutely brilliant and really inspiring. And as I said at the start, I know some people joined after we'd started, but if there are any trusts out there who want to be supported by Helpforce as part of smaller groups of trusts to adopt the response volunteering model, then just express your interest in the chat zone, and Sally will make a note of your names and get back to you. But what we'd like to do now is hand over to V, who's going to marshal the questions. So I'm sure people have got lots of questions for you, Nancy. So V, over to you to deal with the questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. So we got the first person to raise up a hand. I just want to let you know that you can ask a question by raising your hands, and I come to you. So we've got Sarah here. Sarah Woodfu, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Barty. Hi, Nancy. It's Sarah from Milton Keynes. I just wanted to know how big your team is, really, to undertake the responder role.
So we have there's 5 hospitals, big hospitals, I have to say, and I have 3 coordinators and 2 admin staff.
Okay. And how does the hub work?
Sorry.
That's all right. With regards to the hub.
Yeah, so the hub, so we have in a central location across all of the hospitals, we have like a reception area, probably you can see from the photos, and staff either go there or they bleep us, they come directly to us. But I think it's important, we sometimes lose that visibility. And so people don't often think actually volunteers might be the solution to some of our issues or problems. So important to have the hub. So basically they're there, they have volunteers behind them between the core hours, working hours, as well as weekends, and people touch base with us there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next one, we've got Joe Group. Joe, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Hi, thanks for such a really such an interesting presentation, Nancy. We have adopted a very similar model at Chelsea and Westminster with responder volunteers, and we've opened up a volunteering hub on each of our 2 main acute sites. I'd be interested to know what how you're kind of managing the hubs on a day-to-day level, because we have found them, like you, to be incredibly useful, much more responsive, much more front-facing. But they also come with their downsides, which is it requires a lot of day-to-day management. And I was just wondering how might have resolved some of those issues with running a volunteering hub.
That's a tough one. It's quite organic, to be honest. We have a lot of volunteers. We still have around 600 volunteers active at the moment, so we have enough volunteers to cover the rota. But we're very clear. I think, for example, at the Royal London, we do open the hub from 9 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. On some of the other sites, we can't do that because we just don't have the capacity. So again, I think managing your expectations about what that hub means. And I think there's not much more I can say beyond that, really. I just think rota your staff carefully, the volunteers carefully. What's the worst case scenario? If it closes, it closes. Just make sure that the role of the hub isn't completely crucial, if that makes sense. But no volunteer role should be. The trust should still be able to manage if you're not in it, if that makes sense. But for me, we're lucky enough to have a constant stream of volunteers who are able to maintain the hubs. We let the volunteers do it. I mean, we were always on site to support them should they have any issues, and we were able to be contacted at any time and able to go over and give them support if necessary. We also have team leaders, so we've trained up team leaders. Their volunteers have been with us for a long time, and they're able to manage in our absence. But I think start off by, don't keep it open all day long. Keep it 10 till 4. Is that helpful, Joe? Is that what you're asking me?
That's really helpful. Thanks very much. Yeah, we have some senior volunteers, but it sounds like you're much more advanced with having volunteers actually really staffing and manning those volunteering hubs. So that's been really helpful. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Joe. And Nancy, next we have Laura Shalev Green. Laura, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Nancy. This is absolutely amazing. Hello. My question's about downtime and whether the hubs experience any periods where there aren't tasks coming through, and what volunteers are doing during any downtime that they have. And maybe that was an issue at the beginning and not so much now, but I'm interested in when there's a lull, what happens?
No, that's a really good question. Again, we initially, before it all started, we would send volunteers up to wards anyway to ask them, did they need any help? This is how it sort of works in 2 ways, really. Is there something we can do to help your ward today? We can, with the fact sheet, we can help with your meal times. We can help with patients that might be lonely. And again, I think it really helps this whole thing around the holistic care of the patient, because sometimes it's overlooked. Again, that whole thing about volunteers being overlooked in terms of they can really provide so much more holistic care to patients. So when volunteers haven't got anything to do, they would just go up to the wards and introduce themselves and say, is there anything I can do to help your ward today? Or they would go to the pharmacy to see if there's any TTOs. And that was the point I made right at the beginning, that keep seeking it out. Yeah, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got Kate Manning. Kate, are you there?
I am, thank you. Hi, Nancy. I have a question around the volunteers. Do you share them across the hospitals, or are they specifically attached to one hospital?
They are specifically attached to one hospital. although volunteers have been known to change themselves, they've asked to change. But particularly during COVID, one of the things we were very clear about is that we wanted people to not have to travel too far in public transport. That formed part of the risk assessment. And we sort of asked people to choose a hospital that's nearest to where they live, for two reasons. It also helps to reduce your transport costs, if I'm honest. So, but we're very flexible. So if somebody might live in Newham and wants to actually experience Royal London, then we're open to that as well.
Okay, thanks so much, Kate and Nancy. We got more questions in the chat box, so I'm just gonna speak them. And then Helena asking, how's your experience using Better Impact? Does it support this model well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yes, it does. I was working with an Excel spreadsheet before we introduced Better Impact, and it definitely helps. It helps to manage shifts. It helps to manage the clock. You know, you've got the volunteer clock, so you can see who's on shift. It helps to align booking sessions for training, because the training was quite complicated because we had all these different modules. So we had to have up to 6 additional modules of trainings that people could do. And it really helps to organise that. So bookings is very helpful. I would definitely say I've worked in volunteering now for 25 years, and Better Impact, I think, is one of the best tools I've ever used. And it has but it takes a long time to get used to using it, and it's got a lot more functions than probably any one person knows. So I'd recommend Better Impact.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Next one, we got Charlotte. I think the question is quite similar to someone else, but I'm just gonna still say it. Do you only have your own volunteers at Barts? In Somerset voluntary sector, volunteers work within a trust setting, example, end-of-life support. Is that a common approach? I guess.
Sorry,
I guess she meant that you only have your volunteers in Barts area. I don't really understand.
Yeah.
Is Charlotte
asking whether we engage in? Sorry.
That's me. Shall I clarify?
Yeah.
I was asking whether at Barts you only have Barts Trust volunteers working. In Somerset, we have voluntary sector partners who operate within the hospital setting, for example, providing befriending and so on. I'm new to NHS volunteering. I wondered if what your actual setup is, or whether what we've got in Somerset is common, or it just happens to be that way. So.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. I mean, we have some very specialist charities that come in, you know, but they come under the umbrella of volunteering, so we support all the governance and everything. But they work in a different way to the response volunteers. So people like, for example, Stroke Association, Macmillan, some of the charities that we work with. So none of that's changed at all. That remains the same. And all volunteers come under our governance, and we support them as we would. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks so much, Charlotte and Nancy. Diane Young has. Pardon? Yeah.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we have a question from Diane Young here. She said, you mentioned pet as therapy dogs. Have you had them back?
Not yet, no. Our infection prevention team won't allow it yet.
Okay.
I know that Pets as Therapy have said that the pets can go back, but our trust won't allow it quite yet.
Yeah. And next question from Jenny. Jenny asks, are your volunteers allowed into COVID areas?
No.
No.
No. No.
There's
a lot more. We're not allowing visitors onto the wards at the moment, so there's a strong feeling that, you know, if visitors can't go to visit their loved ones, then it doesn't resonate with our chief nurse in particular that volunteers should be allowed to go onto wards. There's multiple reasons: the cross-contamination, the wards cross-contamination, community cross-contamination. There's a number of reasons why volunteers aren't going onto wards COVID wards. I mean, they don't go onto wards really, because they change. It changes so quickly. But what they are very proactive in taking things up to patients, and supporting the visitors in that way. We are looking at creating a super befriender as per the UCLH model, and there's a conversation we're going to have this week about whether that's something we might start to introduce to the wards, but it's at the moment people are a bit uncomfortable with it here at Barts.
Thank you, Nancy. Gina here asked, what are your additional 6 modules for training?
Sorry, what are the ambitions?
Additional 6 modules of training?
So we start with the basic, which is the mandatory that all have to do, and then they do end of life care training, they do manual handling training, they do mealtime training, they do something called Namaste, which is a type of befriending or working with dementia patients, and they also cover things like conflict and confrontation, particularly for and the emergency department, which is another module.
Thank you. Anita asked, how many volunteers would you have in the hub at any one time? And are these over and above your meet and greeters?
Yes. Oh yes, definitely. Because so the hub volunteers at the moment, they take the calls, the tasks, and then they will go and they meet in the hub, and then we have people come and say to us, could you help on Ward 13? We need some support in meal times. There's a patient on the renal ward that needs somebody to go and talk to them, and they get these requests. That's how it was working before COVID. The volunteers in the hub at the moment, they meet and greet, they're the second, so you have the screening and then you have the hub directly behind.
Thank you.
So the screening, they come to the volunteers desk, and the volunteers will do all the visitors' deliveries, collections deliveries, as well as escorting patients, visitors who are there for end of life care, as well as doing the letter for a loved one, as well as supporting PPE deliveries, etc. So the hubs are multi-purpose.
Okay. Thanks so much. Sorry, someone is speaking. Okay. Just want to make sure if you're not asking the questions to a guest speaker, please can you mute yourself? And the next question we've got from Tracy. Can you say a bit more about your training program? Do you offer any communication skill training, especially like listening, phone skills, talking to distressed individuals?
Yes, I just spoke about that really. So we have we have an outside provider that comes in and delivers the Namaste training, which is funded by our charity. We also have the end of life care, which has been prepared and delivered by our palliative care team. So there's a lot of training around communication skills, as well as the mandatory training that all volunteers have to do, which includes communication skills and the statutory mandatory training. But we're very good at Barts. Actually, they invite the volunteers to lots of additional pieces of training that the staff get. So volunteers have a real great training program here, I have to say.
Thank you. Elizabeth asked, can I just ask with regard to the iPad video calls, does the volunteer stay with the patient on the wards to support a call from the family member?
Well, we're not there yet with that one. We have iPads, we have all of that up on the wards, but there's still concern around volunteers on the wards, and hopefully that will be the role of the super befriender that I mentioned previously.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Well, I just see Debbie raising her hand. Debbie, do you want to ask questions on the call? Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I was just actually going to add that we have got volunteers on the wards, and they're the ones who are making the connect with the family and then doing the FaceTime call. And just, Nancy, obviously I understand what you're saying from your chief nurse's perspective, and I guess when we're bringing the volunteers in, they're doing the extended IPC training, donning and doffing training, and the wards have very quickly adapted to the fact of the kind of they can't go in where there's any aerosol generating procedures. So we've got it in some of our COVID areas where the staff are absolutely pushed. We've got it in our A&E COVID assessment areas where visitors are bringing things that can be brought into the patient. So it kind of, for us now, is embedded, but I can totally see that the challenges that you're facing, because we, you know, may have had a few of those initially. It's definitely worth persevering, because we've had some great experiences of families contacting the volunteers, getting to know them before they've then gone up and made that call. So they're all very familiar with each other. And the other thing, just around your pet therapy dogs, hours are coming back on the 14th of December to our outside areas. So neuro rehab, it was a massive part of their programme. So we do it obviously outside only, which, you know, hopefully it's not going to be freezing cold. But there's a core group of patients on neuro rehab that will be, that they don't even have to come into the hospital. You can access this courtyard from outside, so they won't be on the ward at all. So it's better than nothing, I guess. It's not the ideal, but it's a starting point, certainly, for us.
Thank you so much. No, Nancy, you go on.
Sorry, I hear what you're saying, and you know, I'm sort of pushing to have volunteers onto the wards, but bearing in mind that I think the concern here is that it's such a multicultural area, and they're worried about community contagion. You know, we're in the middle of central London, East London, which is hugely populated, very high at the moment for COVID transmission and reproduction, etc. So I think what they're trying to, I think they're concerned that we would obviously not want to put volunteers into a vulnerable position and to take it back into communities, etc. So I understand the reservations that the trust have, but we are, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I think they would be absolutely invaluable personally, and that's why we're tentatively talking now about creating this super befriender role, with the aim of putting them onto non-COVID wards to start with.
Oh, well, good luck with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie and Nancy. Next question we got here from Becky. Becky asking, is the training provided online? Is that face to face?
For COVID training, all the training for volunteers at the moment is all online. Before it wasn't. It was face to face. A lot of it's face to face, but now it's all online, and it's you know, the role is that level of training. The task that they're doing, the training that we can do it can be online. But I think when you're talking about things like end of life care, my feeling is that it should be more face to face. That's just my feeling. But everything we're doing at the moment is online.
And is that through Better Impact, or do you have your trust online platform so volunteers can join?
So, well, the e-learning, the e-stat mandatory stuff's all done via Better Impact, but we have a range of videos that are supported by YouTube, and we filmed our volunteer induction right at the beginning in March. So that's delivered via YouTube, to be honest.
Okay. That's really good. The next question we got from Gina. Do you have any issues with volunteers not being reliable and your hub being under-resourced? It's a tough question.
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. It's the hardest part of our job, I think. I don't know if my colleagues agree with that one, but I think it's tough, because a lot of times people say, well, you know, I don't have to go in today, I'm not getting paid. So I guess it's all about, and that's why it's so important, you know, to make sure the outcome is something that really resonates with volunteers. You know, we do have problems, and there's always going to be those issues. But things like using WhatsApp groups, really successful for us. So, you know, even if we get a couple of volunteers who can't turn up on one day, you just put it out to the group, and they most of the time someone will say, I can come in this afternoon and help out. And I always wanted that to be the case. You know,
I'm so sorry.
I always wanted that.
Someone is, if you're not speaking a speaker, please can you unmute? Can you mute yourself? Okay, I think that's fine. Continue, Nancy.
Yes, I think volunteering is great when you've got someone who says, I've got an hour to spend this afternoon, I think I'll go into the hospital and do something to help out. And that was our ambition. You know, yes, we have rotated volunteers, but also we wanted to be really flexible as well. And that's another benefit, I think, of this active response volunteering.
Thank you, Nancy.
Is that helpful?
I hope so, Gina, if you can just put in the chat box to say it was helpful. I'm sure it is. Nancy, we have a question from Tracy. Can you let her know your detail of your external provider for Namaste Tirology? I'm not sure what it is. Did you mention something?
Or?
Namaste. Don't know.
It's in the Namaste. Yeah. So that works with St Joseph Hospice. I'll send you their information.
Perfect. Yeah, I can put it on the group in this group as well.
So there is a training manual. I think I've shared it with helpful. Some that might be helpful to people who don't know.
Gina was asking, in terms of the FaceTime, what patients are needing assistance with this? Example, elderly, those with their smartphones. Gina, are you there? Could you just clarify your questions for me? I didn't really understand it.
Oh. Yes, sorry. Yeah, because this is something I'd be very interested in at our hospital, but you see, the majority of our patients are actually quite fit and well because we specialise in obstetrics and gynecology. So we only have one ward in gynecology, which may require some patients to have support in this area, because we'd find that the most of our obstetrics patients would have the facility to do all their own FaceTime and etc. So I was just interested to find out, you know, with modern technology nowadays, you know, even my 83-year-old mother has a smartphone and can FaceTime. So what type of patients actually need this type of support?
Well, from our perspective here in East London, I mean, often elderly patients might struggle with that. I'll go. But there's often patients who don't have a smartphone, to be honest. And there are some patients that would struggle to. Well, there is a digital divide in East London. We're also experiencing that now with the virtual clinics. So there still does exist, and those patients definitely need a platform to be able to get on. The other thing I should also say is that the Wi-Fi is complicated at Barts, so it's, you know, it is a challenge at times.
Thank you. Gina, you're on mute. Sorry, I have to mute you because there's some background noise. Okay, so I think that's answered the question from Gina then. We still have a bit of time. Does anyone want to raise your hands and ask Nancy questions? I think I've gone through all the questions in the chat box. If I miss anyone, please raise your hand. I'm so sorry if I miss anyone. Okay. Oh, there we go. So, Amanda, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if anyone's ever done like a thank you or like a gift card or anything, just to say as a thank you to any of the volunteers. What kind of things have other organisations done? It'd just be good to know.
Not sure why Nancy have to stand up. Anyone want to answer Amanda's question? Want to raise your hands? Oh, I got Sarah here. Sarah, do you want to answer it?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Hiya. Nancy, we designed our own thank you card back for National Volunteers Week, because normally we would have, different events going on. So we designed our own card, and our local Colour Connection, who we get all our printing from, they actually printed it for us for free. and we sent that out to all 500 of our volunteers. And then recently, the other thing that we did is because we couldn't have our long service awards, we again designed another card and certificate and badge, and instead of holding a gathering all together like we normally would do, we sent those out along with a cream, like an afternoon tea box, to all of the volunteers that were receiving long service awards.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So I think Nancy's back, and you got some lanyard in your hand.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We designed a medal.
Oh, lovely.
A medal for them. And it says like COVID-19 support volunteers, so it's for their courage, kindness and tenacity. And these, we did sort of like in the hubs, a socially distanced afternoon, and the executive directors came and presented them with these medals. That was nice. And we're just about to set up, we're going to try and do like a big Zoom with Just Eat vouchers for volunteers instead of their annual celebration. That's the plan.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And we saw a few members have popped out their answers in the chat box as well. So if you can check them, that'd be great. Oh, we got more questions here. Oh, Sarah was asking where you go the medals from? I guess where you get the medals from. I guess from an extra.
I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a website. It does start with the word medal. I can't remember. If you want to send me your email, I'll put it on to you.
I feel like my voice is echoing. I'm not so sure why.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's better now. Tracy is asking, Nancy, you want to try to mute yourself just a moment, maybe from your laptop?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's better now. Can Nancy or someone else say more about the super befriending role? What will they do, and what additional package and what additional training package and support will be in place? Will they have clinical supervision? I guess to talk more about your super befriender role, Nancy, that you were mentioning before.
I couldn't hear that very well. Could you repeat for me, please?
Yeah, can you talk more about a super befriender role?
So the idea of the super befriender, and this is I can't claim credit for this role. This is from UCLH, but it's the idea is I think that they go to the wards and they help people to access the iPad. So every ward in a hospital has donated an iPad, but those iPads are not getting used, and we know that there are people who love to have a chat with their relatives, and so the idea is that we specifically train up volunteers, and only a few of them, because again we want to limit the footfall onto the wards, and they will be the befrienders going on and supporting patients on the wards to do this interaction with the iPads and anything else they can sort of help with. So we are getting requests now as well from teams to say this patient's been in the hospital for 4 months. Could we please have a volunteer? So we are trying to create this role to adapt in the current climate. So rather than just defender as they normally would be, they have to have even more training and support to do this role.
Oh, that's links really well with the next question from Gina. She was asking what's the additional training package for the super befriender role.
Well, I think it'll be more about how much experience they already have. I think this is a lot more about experience than it is about anything else. So somebody who's fairly confident, obviously they'd have to have lots of training on donning and doffing. All our volunteers are receiving training on donning and doffing. But I think that we have a befriending package. We have the Namaste training. But I think for me, I'll be looking for people who've got confidence and experience more than training, to be honest.
Thank you, Nancy. Elizabeth's asking questions here. So when volunteers come in, do they go to the hub and wait to be given their task for that shift? And secondly, have there been any issues with volunteers preferring to go to a particular area? So a few of her chose to volunteer in certain areas for personal reasons.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that's a very good question actually. So with the volunteers, there's always things to do in the hubs anyway. There's always a range of tasks straight away, even as they touch base. So you know, doing the visitors' belongings, etc. But I would say, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question. Could you just repeat the question for me? My mind's gone blank.
She wants to know, so when the volunteers come in, do they wait until a task is given to them? And then do some of your volunteers have a preference of where they want to volunteer?
Yeah. So again, so when in pre-COVID, I mentioned the pick and mix. So, for example, if you're not comfortable doing end-of-life care, then you would only do the first module of training or the other modules that suit you. And then that's documented. So we're very clear about who wants to do what. Yeah. So you can only, for example, you can only do the end-of-life care if you've done the training, and you have to put yourself forward to do the training. So yeah. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. That's a very good question, and it probably needs more of a conversation, to be fair. But as I said, we've got this pick and mix training. Volunteers will select which training they'd like to do or what they don't want to do, and then we align them to those roles, to the tasks that come in.
Thank you.
Their training.
Yeah, that's fine. They have a question from Leslie. Leslie joined us a bit late, so she missed your presentation for quite a few slides, but she just want to clarify whether or not your volunteers are going on to wards, on the wards basically in Barts. No, but then you were mentioning that sometimes Bob's in on the ward to ask if staff need help. So could you clarify on that? So you say your volunteers can go on the wards just to ask what help do they need?
No. So the reason why we're thinking about the super befriender role and the fact that we're getting requests now, and I think we're trying to open up so that volunteers can go on wards. And that's the why we're creating the super befriender role, so that but they need to have more experience and be very quite confident volunteers. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. We got great comments for you from Gina. She said you're an inspiration. So thank you so much, Gina and Nancy. That's a very nice comment. Thank you, Gina.
We all are. Listen to other people and I think, oh my gosh, they're so amazing. Because it's tough. It's a tough role, I feel, managing volunteers in hospitals. It's tough. Because a lot of the time the work that we do, when you work in a charity, working with volunteers sits right at the heart of everything you do. But when you work in a hospital, it's a little bit of a nice to have thing, isn't it? A bit of a discretionary extra, and often we get overlooked. But there's such a powerful force for change, and I think this model that I've adopted really focuses in on, well, tell me what you'd like them to do. Where can they help you the most? And I think that will change the culture of how we think about patient experience. And I think with the volunteers are so important in improving patient experience, and we've just got to keep pushing it. Indeed. Well, I do at Barts anyway. I'm not sure, but from what I can gather, I feel quite strongly about that.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Nancy. We have a next question for you from Linda. Who has direct responsibility for the volunteers in case there are any negative issues? Who follows up?
In terms of what issue, sorry?
Like any negative issues, I suppose, if volunteers have negative issues. Yeah.
Well, obviously we have a misconduct process. So if it goes to me as head of volunteering, and I usually am able to deal with it. If it goes beyond me, then it will go to my line manager, who's the Director of Governance and Assurance here at Barts. And then above her is the Chief Nurse.
Thanks so much.
But we have a very clear misconduct procedure, and I think that's really important, as well as a grievance as well, so that they can, both misconduct and grievance procedures, so that we're very clear about how to deal with those situations.
That's really good to hear. We have a question from Joe here. Do you have role descriptions for hub volunteers and team leader that you can share, please?
Yeah, very happy to do so. Yeah.
Is that in the
role descriptions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So Anne-Mary was just asking if she can talk to you more about the use of Better Impact. So I was thinking you can always ask on Connect Forum, and then a lot of people have been using Better Impact. They can always share the comments as well. But Nancy can definitely help to go on Connect Forum if that's okay with you, Nancy. Yeah.
Yeah. Any help I can offer. Yeah.
And Kim was also asked if you can share your grievance and misconduct procedure. Would it be okay if you can share with us? And I definitely will put on Connect. And some of you already sign up to turn on your notifications on Connect, and you will see if the document is online. You will get notification email, so you can go and look at them. Yeah, and team leader also. Yeah. Yes, Nancy.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We also have a SOP, which has been really helpful, which I created, and it's been the most useful document because it just gives absolute clarity about volunteers. I'm very happy to share that as well. I think as heads of volunteers, volunteer leads, we should definitely have a standard operating procedure.
Thank you, Nancy. And a lot of people have been asking if they can ask you to share your team leader role description and your additional training modules. But I will send a list to you, Nancy, and then we can upload on Connect, and everyone can access them if that's okay. And the SOP as well, of course. Yes, just about 3 minutes before 12 o'clock. Before we end, I just want to let you all know that the slides will be shared later on. And Nancy have been working with us to produce this packaging, include all of the documents and instruction how she's been running this module, and it's on the Healthforce website. So you can always go on the healthforce.community and look for, it's right on the front page, say view the report, Volunteering Innovators Program, is all in there. But if you can't find it all, just drop me an email, vt@healthforce.community, and I will show you where it is. Before we end, Mark, do you want to come in and wrap up the session?
I just think that's been an absolutely superb session, superb hour. And if there was such a thing as a virtual standing ovation, Nancy, I'd send it across to you. You've sat there and had to deal with everybody's questions, and you've kept your energy levels up, which is great. So really appreciate all the time you've given. And I'm sure on behalf of everyone who's been on here, thank you so much. It's been a great session. So thank you. And good luck, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon. See you then.